Hi, good morning. Thanks so much for tuning in for our video on quadratics, Unit 2. We're going to look at solving quadratics. So, in this unit, we will look at the 4 ways to solve quadratics. We can solve them by factoring, by square rooting, by completing the square, and the quadratic formula. Today, we're going to focus on solving by factoring. So Thursday in class, we went over factoring. I do have some videos posted on Thursday's Canvas page. And if you are struggling with factoring, let me know and I can walk you through some steps. So I'm going to look at factoring. So here are my steps to solving by factoring. There are 3. I will post these also so you have them in Canvas. But step number 1, we're going to factor. Step number 2, we're going to use the zero product property. And then step number 3, we're going to solve each factor. So we know how to factor. I think we know how to solve, but the zero product property. So this is what the zero product property says. If A times B equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0, or they could both be 0. So for our purposes, we're going to be looking at factoring. So I have our notes from yesterday that I'm going to put in over here. So we solved this, or we factored this quadratic, x squared plus 5x plus 6, using the bottoms up method and the grouping method. So if I just look at it factored in the bottoms up method, I have 2 factors. If these 2 factors equal 0, so if x plus 2 times x plus 3 equals 0, then one of these products, this is the entire A, this is the entire B, has to equal 0. So 2 things multiply to give me 0, 2 things multiply to give me 0. So I'm not saying that x is 0, I'm saying that the factor x plus 2 equals 0, and the factor x plus 3 equals 0. And then I solve. So if x plus 2 equals 0, if I subtract 2 from both sides, x is negative 2. If x plus 3 equals 0, and I subtract 3 from both sides, then x equals negative 3. And I have solved this quadratic by factoring. So just some things to point out. I started off x squared plus 5x plus 6. In order to solve, I do need an actual equation, so it needs to be equal to 0. Go through the steps solving, either with the bottoms up or with the grouping method, and then set the factors equal to 0. So I want to look at the examples that we factored in class together yesterday, and they've already been factored, and I want to go through and solve them. It has to be set equal to 0 in order to solve by factoring. So I'm going to assume on the next page that all of my expressions are set equal to 0. So these are the problems that we did yesterday. So I'm going to go through and make this top row all equal to 0, and then I'm going to solve them out. They've already been factored. So if I look at this first one, I have x times x plus 2 equals to 0. I have 2 factors. This is one factor. This is another factor. So I'm going to set them equal to 0. So my first factor equals 0. No solving is required. My second factor, x minus 2 equals 0. A little bit of solving is required. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So x equals positive 2. So 0 and 2 are my 2 solutions. A small hint. The highest exponent, the degree, will tell you how many solutions you're going to get. So I'm expecting it to get 2 solutions. Oh, there they are. For number 2, I can use either one of these in factored form. They'll give me the same solutions. But set equal to 0 here, set equal to 0 here. I'm going to do this first one. So my factor, negative r, here's one factor, equals 0. I need to divide by negative 1. 0 divided by negative 1 is still 0. So there's one of my solutions. And then r plus 7 equals 0. So if I subtract 7 from both sides, r equals negative 7. And my 2 solutions. So it is literally one step more after factoring to solve. Here, number 3, I have it factored. I'm going to set it equal to 0. I have 2 factors. I'm going to set it equal to 0. So x equals 0. No solving required. X plus 1 equals 0. Subtracting the 1. Negative 1 is my solution. I do want to show you, let me find my calculator, that I can check these problems and make sure that they work. So if I look at number 1, if I go to my original solution and I plug in 0, please use parentheses. It's just a good habit, because that way if I was using a negative, I wouldn't have to worry about distributing the negative or what's being squared. So using parentheses with my x, I have 0 squared minus 2 times 0, I'm checking this solution, and it does in fact give me 0. If I try 2, so 2 squared minus 2 times 2, it does give me 0. If I look at my second one, I'm going to check 0 and negative 7. So that negative is not being squared, but the r is. So negative and then a 0 squared minus 7 times the 0. Kind of boring with the 0. But with my negative 7, I have negative and then a negative 7 squared. Let the calculator do all of the order of operations for you. There's a negative, and then my r value itself that's being squared is a negative. And then minus 7 times negative 7, and it does in fact give me 0. So you can check these when you're done, just to make sure that when you plug both of them into the equation, they both will give you 0 one at a time. All right, looking at my next set of problems that I have here, I'm going to go through and set these 3 equal to 0. All right, so for this first one, I have it factored down here. I'm going to use this x plus 2 times x plus 10, factored from this equals 0. So I have 2 factors. I'm going to set these 2 factors equal to 0 and solve. So x plus 2 equals 0. I'm going to subtract 2. My x value is negative 2. X plus 10 equals 0. I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides, and x is equal to negative 10. All right, looking at number 5, this is set equal to 0. Then my factored form can also be set equal to 0. Here are my 2 factors. So p plus 1 equals 0, I can subtract 1, and p is equal to negative 1. For my other one, I had p plus 1 equals 0, and p is equal to negative 1. Now, these 2 solutions are identical. You don't have to list them twice. I encourage you to list them twice to show that you do have, in fact, 2 solutions, because it is squared. This just means something special happens on the graph, which we'll talk about next week when we get to graphing. All right, number 6, here I'm looking for 3 solutions because I'm raising it to the 3rd power. All right, so if you remember, like, this did not factor any further because I couldn't find a product of 10 with a sum of 2. So I'm going to set this factor equal to 0, 3b equals 0. If I divide by 3, 0 divided by 3 is 0. 0 divided by anything but itself is going to be 0. And then my other factor here, v squared plus 2v plus 10 equals 0. Well, this didn't factor. This gives me 2 solutions. So I'm going to need the quadratic formula, so I'm going to have to come back to this. So we will revisit this question when we get to the other ways to factor, or the other ways to solve, because it won't solve by factoring. All right, and then looking at these last 2 on this page, let me get rid of this. If I set this equal to 0, so here I have 2 factors. I need to set my factored form equal to 0. So r plus 7 equals 0. If I subtract 7 from both sides, okay, there's messy. R is equal to negative 7. And then r plus 4 equals 0. Subtracting 4 from both sides, my r value is negative 4. Let me just do a real quick check on that problem. Checking out my negative 7 and my negative 4. So negative 7 squared plus 11 times negative 7 plus 28 should give me 0. And then negative 4 squared plus 11 times negative 4 plus 28 should also give me 0. So feel free to check these with your calculators. For number 8, I actually have 3 factors. Now, one of them is a constant, but I still have 3 factors. So there's a 5, an x plus 7, and an x plus 8. So I'm going to set them all equal to 0. Five equals 0. If I solve this, I don't get an x value. 5 will not equal 0, and I don't have an x to set it equal to. This does not give me a solution. I can still set it as a factor equal to 0, but it doesn't give me a solution. So if I subtract 7 here, x is equal to negative 7. If I subtract 8 here, x is equal to negative 8. I was only expecting to get 2 solutions because it's to the 2nd power, quadratic. So this 5 didn't give me a solution. So I'll set it equal to 0, but these are my 2 solutions. So on your homework that I gave you on Thursday, also posted in Canvas, hopefully you factored all of these. I would like for you to then go through after they've been factored and solve them all out. Set them all equal to 0. All right, I'll see you in our Zoom.